Hello and welcome to another episode of the No Notes podcast. My name is Morgan.
I'm JD.
And we have a reoccurring guest. I was going to say new special guest, but she's been here so many times.
I'm Mariana.
Hi. Third time on the No Notes podcast.
Is it my
This is your first time on, because you were in the Barbie episode, and we did trivia with Jacob.
Yes.
My third time.
Yeah. Soon to be wife of the No Notes podcast.
Yes, last time I was here, we were not engaged.
You're right, and now we are.
Yeah.
And what better way to spend our time today with our special guest? We are talking quintessential 2010 teen movies. The 2010 teen movies was just a time that I will never personally forget in my life. I don't know how you guys feel about this.
No, it was memorable for sure.
Yes. So 2010, like probably 2014, just like peak year. Back when we put feathers in our hair and we had the hipster style. Everything was random.
The glasses with like the popped out lenses.
Yes.
Yeah. The duct tape book bags. Did you guys do duct tape in
We did
Oklahoma?
do duct tape for sure.
I remember those. Yeah, vividly.
Yeah. So in these days, people made movies for teenage girls, which I argue has not happened since.
No.
And did not happen before that moment.
And Barbie's the closest we've gotten to that.
Yes, absolutely. And I just think that out of this time were born some of the greatest film franchises and book to movie adaptations that will and have ever been created. I have been impacted greatly by this era of filmmaking. I was definitely like huge nerd, always on like Tumblr, Pinterest, really into One Direction.
That was my niche.
Yeah, reading my little books in school and then, lining up to watch The Hunger Games every time they came out. Twilight was a little before my time, but Twilight was definitely a part of that.
Hunger Games, Divergent.
Yeah.
Divergent series, yeah.
So
Maze Runner.
Maze Runner.
let's go through each of us. What are like the biggest movies that you think impacted you from this era of filmmaking?
Mine was definitely The Hunger Games. That was like my
Yeah.
series. I like aggressively read all the books. Percy Jackson, but even
Percy Jackson.
the movie did not do
Yeah.
it
It's trying to make
justice.
a comeback.
It is. The movie did not do it justice, but the series was like so deep and impactful to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any?
You're not a teenage
No,
girl.
I
You're
wasn't.
not a teenager girl.
I have never been a teenage girl, but I was around during this era. I existed. I was starting to find my love for movies. I definitely read Harry Potter and The Hunger Games and loved them. I was a huge Hunger Games fan and a huge Percy Jackson fan. I remember being disappointed by the Percy Jackson movies and really
Not by
loving.
Logan Lerman though.
Never. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are a couple others on this list that I remember like kind of finding later in my life, like going back. The Giver was
Yes.
a huge one for me as
Yeah.
a teenager because I read that book and then
Yeah.
the movie came out like around the time I read the book. I think I was like 13 or 14.
Yeah.
Very impactful. And then like in the years since, like The Perks of Being a Wallflower and Me and Earl and the Dying Girl are movies that I've come to like really love and like really connect to.
Yeah, I would put like all the John Green movies. I love those books.
So those are like, what are those?
The Fault in Our Stars, Paper Towns.
Paper Towns.
I think that's the only two they've made. And then Twilight, of course, for me is a huge one. The Hunger Games is a huge one for me. I almost got a Hunger Games tattoo when I was 18, but
No,
I
you
got
didn't.
a Lord of the Rings one instead, which is a little more
I think that's more appropriate.
socially acceptable, thanks to my mom for not letting me get. I literally almost got the Mockingjay.
No, you didn't.
As my first, it was between that and the Lord of the Rings tattoo that I have. I would
That's
have
like
not
the
regretted either of
Gen
them.
Z equivalent to a Harry Potter tattoo of
Yes.
a millennial.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
me.
Morgan.
Just an idea of where I was at in those days. I really liked The Mortal Instruments, which was another book to movie. Divergent was just like the knockoff Hunger Games.
You disagree?
I mean, you're kind of right. If I Stay, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. I put those in like the same like teen girl dying but also finding love category. The Maze Runner.
Was If I Stay the one where they both had illnesses and they couldn't get okay?
No, that was 5 Feet Apart. Same vibe.
Yes,
for
that one
sure.
traumatized me a little.
Mia and the Dying Girl is actually one of my favorite.
I love
movies.
that
I think
movie.
it's
I
so
really
good.
do.
I haven't read the book, but I love the movie.
Yeah, so let's start with like the most obvious connection between most of these is book to movie adaptations.
Yeah.
Why do you think those all became so popular so quickly? Did you guys read most of these books as they were coming out?
Yeah. I think it was just
definitely.
the fact that everyone was reading the books and it was like still cool to read. I think it's cool to read now again. I don't know, at some point in like late 2010s, it stopped being cool to read and people just like didn't anymore, and now it's becoming cool again.
Yeah.
But I think since it was just like a form of escapism that people got to see come to life, they were super excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think like because Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, the Egyptian ones that Rick Riordan wrote.
those were so
Do you guys
good.
remember those?
Yeah.
I wish they would have made a movie of those.
Those were so good.
And yeah, Hunger Games, like all of those were like the pop culture, I feel like at the time for me as a teenager. And so it's like all my friends were reading them and we were having fun discussing them. Like this was like starting elementary school with Harry Potter. I think I was like 8 when I first read Harry Potter. It's true. I had a Deathly Hallows tattoo. No. But yeah, like I loved Harry Potter. I loved all that stuff. And so it was like I don't know, it was kind of like, I feel like for me or whatever, like the group of people I was friends with, like those books were like the event that we all kind of connected on, the way that like Marvel movies kind of became that.
Yeah.
And so I think when like the Harry Potter movies were coming out, and those were like so financially successful, and then all of my friends were talking about them, and like I remember going to see the last couple in the movie theater.
Everyone was talking about them.
Right.
It was just like a communal thing that brought us all together.
And then like I think Twilight did the same thing, even though that wasn't one personally for me.
Yeah.
Percy Jackson tried, Divergent tried, Hunger Games was like the other big success.
Yeah.
And then now we have The Songbirds and Snakes, and they're making a Haymitch like, you know, movie, and like so they're still going in some ways, and so it's like, but I think it was like they were the big thing in pop culture that tied like Gen Z people together. And then movie studios made good movies based off of them that further tied Gen Z people together.
Yeah. And I think so much of it was like this new target audience that was already in love with this story, because like they like obviously books had been made into movies before, but like not in the way that these were, and like how huge they were, how they were franchises, and then it being like, I think I read The Hunger Games and Percy Jackson as part of my school assignment.
Same.
Really?
So it wasn't like I just read it because I liked reading. Like I read it because literally everyone in the school had to read those books.
I chose it as like my summer reading assignment.
Yeah.
They like gave us a list and I like asked if I could do those.
Yeah.
I remember doing that, yeah.
But it was like so popular for so long. And then if you count Twilight, like Twilight was so popular with just women in general, like of all ages for so long. And then, you know, one person was like, oh yeah, let's make this like cheesy little, I'm gonna say Twilight started all of this, probably not true, but let's like make this cheesy little movie. And they put it out there and it was like, oh my gosh, this movie had no budget and like some no-name actors at the time really, and a director no one's ever heard of, and so many people showed up because they loved Twilight. Like it didn't matter what they put out in the theater, like people were gonna go pay money to watch
the
it.
name brand essentially.
And then Harry Potter, exactly the same. Like kids loved Harry Potter, and kids and teenagers always are a great target audience. They spend so much money.
You know what I think just did that is Five Nights at Freddy's.
Exactly.
Which is like,
it doesn't matter what you put out.
It doesn't
They
matter how
love
bad
it.
that movie was. But teenagers showed up for it. And I know like you and Colin did a whole episode.
Yeah, teenagers and Morgan.
If you haven't listened to Morgan and Colin's hour-long episode about the theories behind Five Nights at Freddy's, go listen to that.
Yeah.
But I think it's like, it's the same thing Five Nights at Freddy's did, but like when we were teenagers. And so it was like relevant to us. It's like,
Yeah, that was like the most hormone intense theater I've ever seen in my life. That
It was
was
tough.
so many teenagers going through puberty at the same time. It was
But
really scary.
That was us going to see Harry Potter and Percy
Yeah.
Jackson and Hunger Games. Like,
I think a little more tame, but yeah.
yeah, I think so.
Maybe.
But I think, as a generation, maybe Gen Z was more tame. Didn't grow up on the internet as much, so.
Yeah.
But I think that was like, that's, I feel like that's sort of a similar thing. Very different because it was based on a book, not a video game, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think what made these ones so interesting was the amount of money they got put into them because they
Mhm.
knew they had a fan base.
Yeah.
Where it's like now you see movies like kind of similar like to the Hunger Games, Maze Runner, like the apocalyptic teenage girl takes over the world vibe movies.
Yeah.
And it's like not quite the same, like they're still cool, but they just don't have that fan base, so they don't have that like original budget
Mhm.
going into it to just
Mhm.
like make it incredible. Because some of these movies you can write off as like, okay, like Twilight and
Yeah.
like we have some like Disney movie, like the Percy Jackson movie wasn't very good, but then you have movies like The Hunger Games that was like genuinely, I think, incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had
And
like,
The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, like those movies are incredibly made films that just happen to be in this same.
yeah, it's like this weird moment where you had like really talented actors in like The Hunger Games or Perks of Being a Wallflower,
Yeah.
and really talented screenwriters and directors working in this like popular genre. And for whatever reason, as it's based out of popularity, things like Marvel, like Fast and Furious, have kind of, I don't know if they've replaced it, but like they've become more popular and like
Yeah.
Fast and Furious.
those movies make a ton of money.
Dude, they really do.
That's true.
Sadly.
But it's like all
I
of
was like, how?
it's like when these franchises were super popular, they were able to get the best actors and the best writers and directors to make them. And I don't know, I think they've like become less popular. Maybe they've gone to Netflix, maybe they've gone to TV. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I was gonna say it has to do with teenage girls being attracted to men.
Great segue into my next question. So another thing that a lot of these have in common is they're like, so for some reason around like apocalypse and death with like a great side of romance.
Literally.
And it's like awkward teenage girl saves the world and gets the guys.
Mhm.
Why do you think this connected so well
I think
with the world?
I think it connected well with like the middle school, high school
Oh, yeah.
girls because we were awkward in middle school.
Yes.
Whether we recognized it or not, we like related with the awkward lead.
Yeah, I'm
Like-
going with like middle school is the apocalypse.
It kind of
weird,
is.
awkward
We survived the
teenage
apocalypse.
girls trying to make it through
It, yeah, I think we just like saw ourselves somehow in like Jennifer Lawrence, which no, I don't see myself in Jennifer Lawrence anymore.
Yeah.
But I think it was middle school girls trying to grasp onto like a potential love life
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
didn't exist in real life.
Which will be capitalized on to the end of our days.
Yeah.
Teenage girls wanting
Small love.
Yeah. I think another really interesting thing about these movies is like so many of them had the same actors through each franchise. I wrote down a few that just like came to the top of my head. We have like Miles Teller was in so many things. He was in Divergent. He was in The Spectacular Now. He was in 21 and Over, which not quite teenage girl, but we're talking about everything.
that's the teenage boy.
Yeah.
That's like the aspirational one for
For you.
that.
This isn't about you.
No.
And then we have Shailene Woodley.
Literally in everything.
Yeah, everything. Josh Hutcherson making a comeback with his Five Nights at Freddy's.
Staying in the teen movie zone.
Yeah, he
Josh.
knows where he belongs. Like,
That's his niche and he's gonna stick to it.
yeah.
Ansel.
Ansel Elgort, Ansel probably, Dylan O'Brien, Sam Claflin was like in everything.
Finnick, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Finnick, and then he was also
Respect.
in
Finnick.
Me Before You,
He
which was a
was
book to
Me Before
movie
You.
romance. And then last but not least, Logan Lerman, who we all love. Those blue eyes in every film.
My true Percy Jackson.
Yeah. So what do you think made this era so memorable? And do you think that it could be recreated?
I'm gonna answer the second question first. I think it can be recreated, but I think it has to be like organic. They have to, I think smart, intelligent people saw what was happening in teenage girls. Like some director probably had a teenage daughter and was like, all of our friends are reading this, are really interested in this type of thing. This is something we can bank on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if some random director out there has a teenage daughter, they should listen to them.
Yes.
To all the directors out there that watch this podcast.
There are probably dozens of them.
So many directors watch this podcast with their teenage daughters.
Yes.
Listen to your teenage daughters. They know so much and they run the world.
They do.
I think it's definitely possible for it to happen again. I think it's doable, but it might not be for a little while. I think teenagers need to regulate themselves before we can get there. If it's anything like Friday Nights at Freddy again, I think it's gonna die really quick.
But that movie made like $200 million.
More than enough.
Why? I'm not a teenage girl anymore, so I guess I don't really get it.
It wasn't made for us though. Like I was made
Some
for
girls in their mid-20s are gonna come on a podcast one day
and be like,
back in my day, Five Nights at Freddy's, horror was everything we needed.
Morgan Jr., Joshua Jr., when they're making their podcasts, are gonna be in their 20s.
Oh my gosh.
Our children are not watching podcasts.
My children watch
So I kind of had a question going off of that. Is like, do you think this like type of movie, like for like whenever it stopped being made in theaters, did like Netflix start doing this? Because like To All the Boys I Loved Before is like the kissing booth.
Yeah.
I feel like
they just did it so much worse.
Yeah. It was so
but
bad.
they sure tried.
They sure tried. I don't know if that's really a try. It's a do.
Because like people love Jacob Elordi now, and like Noah Centineo aren't like they're like the hot guys or not
Noah.
Okay, but then also like I think of Jacob Elordi as like the dude from Euphoria who's like evil and like and I can't imagine like people liking Jacob Elordi like that. But like I know these movies are a lot worse, obviously, than Hunger Games. But like I feel like I don't know, does this like. Did Netflix like pick up the niche whenever like major studios decided to stop, and then the quality dropped because it was Netflix, and now we're just not seeing them anymore? Like
I think so. And I also like have not seen a book to movie other than Dune. Like a big book to movie adaptation in a long time.
Well,
and I do think books are less popular. Like
books are less popular, and a lot of the books that are popular are wildly inappropriate.
Yeah.
I've noticed.
Yeah.
I'll see like a bunch of like recommendations for books, and I'm like, oh cool, and then I'll like go read like a synopsis of it, and it's like, yeah, there's a bunch of really inappropriate scenes, like 5 pages in it. It's like, cool.
Like Game of Thrones almost. Right?
Yeah, in a book.
Yeah.
And I think social media has also ruined like our it boys.
Oh,
like there's
sure.
so many random boys across the internet that girls are just like clinging on to, that no one can be a singular like white boy of the month anymore.
Yeah.
So movies like can't do that for you anymore because they can find someone else on social media they like better and get more content of.
This is a huge
That's
part
really
of
interesting.
My I have this theory that I talk about all the time, that like the way that kids these days like intake media is so different than how we did it, because we had social media and we had all of these things, but we didn't have as many outlets. So like we all had Pinterest and Instagram, but we all talked about the same things all the time. Like we were all, there wasn't like all these different corners of the internet that we got what we
so many pockets
took
now.
in from. It was like the Hunger, like everyone you talked to in your life knew what the Hunger Games was. And now there's things similar to the Hunger Games that you are crazy popular, but not like with everyone. It's like you have to be in that niche to get it. And it's the same with like actors. Like people don't hold actors as highly as we used to. Like it used to be like Josh Hutcherson, like Die Hard, like anything he's in, I'll go watch. And now it's like people just see it more as like, oh, like they're doing a job, they do it well. Like some of them do it so well, you want to go more, but it's not quite the like teen girl, every magazine, like you need to know every single like
magazines
fact
are
about
also
them.
like dead too.
Yeah. So it definitely has changed in that way too, where it's like not everyone is always into the same thing. Like there's so many ways and so many different places to see that it's harder to make it so big.
Yeah, because even if Jacob Elordi is the white boy of the month, right? Like he's only the white boy of the month to a certain demographic. So people are like, oh, it's like I don't know, Tom Holland or something.
Yeah.
Who I don't know.
I think Tom Holland's kind of the closest thing we've gotten lately to like our it white boy, but that's because he's I think dating Zendaya. So
yeah. And same with like streaming services have a little say in this, because it was like the only movies you could really go see is like you either had to go to the Blockbuster and rent something that no one's ever heard of, or you went to the theater and like watched the same movie that all of your friends were watching. And now there's like so many other options, and they are just as good.
Right. There's just too much there's no like one piece of culture that everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
So like how can you make something like this unless you're like doing a Hunger Games prequel, right?
Yeah.
Or you're doing something that's based on a video game, which like,
Yeah.
well, I think there were book adaptations in the first place,
Mhm.
but then also there's no like one book series everyone's talking about, like you said, Mariana. So movies like this like have to be so niche for them to actually exist. I don't know. I also wanted to ask you guys, what's the deal with the Court of Thorns and Roses? That's a thing, right? Is that like another
new
Hunger Games? Like I'm
I
genuinely
think
asking.
that was, from what I understand, good to
Yeah.
read. I haven't read too much into it, but I know it's not as inappropriate as
I think
other
it's a
things.
little inappropriate.
Is it? Okay,
I,
never mind.
I have not personally read it.
I haven't read it
So
either.
ask your parents. No matter what age
Teenage
you are,
daughters
ask
as
your
directors,
parents.
ask your director parents.
But I do think it's the same, like, it is, I think the plot is, like, there's dragons, and it's fantasy,
Yeah.
and it's, like, a girl, and it's romance, and
But it's
it's
not
a
like
huge,
Is that the one where it's like some
franchise.
non-human man that she falls in love with?
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
But it's not like an
Okay.
apocalypse, like, you know, Maze Runner, Hunger Games. It's like a.
Yeah, I think it's just fantasy.
Fairy.
It's fantasy.
More
Okay.
fantasy.
It's like
I will say, I think fantasy is the new, like, for books, like, apocalypse stuff was really popular, and now it's, like, fantasy.
dystopian
Like
was
YA.
like huge.
Yeah.
I was big into dystopian.
But yeah, so that's our quintessential 2010 teen movie talk.
Morgan-
Lots of alliteration.
If I could I ask you, like, and Mariana, I want to ask you as well, like, if you had to pick like a top 4, like a Mount Rushmore of like the most quintessential 2010s like teen movies as teenage girls in the 2010s, like what would you say?
Oh gosh. I would say Pitch Perfect. Hunger Games Catching Fire specifically.
Oh yes,
The best one.
I think The Fault in Our Stars, honestly, very peak 2010s. And
Pawn
then-
Stars was huge.
It was so big. And then maybe Divergent, just because of Theo James.
Yeah. Divergent was really popular, and I rewatched it. It's on Netflix right now, but I rewatched it this week for this, and it was not as good as I still loved it, but not. I was expecting, like, in my head as a teenager, like, it was as good as The Hunger Games, and I went back and watched it and was like, no, Morgan, it was not.
It was really disappointing.
Those Hunger Games
Yeah.
movies are actually so good. Like
Yeah.
all 5 of them are just super well
Yeah,
made.
they're
Like they're really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a different top 4, Morgan, or do you
I
agree?
agree with most of those. I feel like you have to put in Harry Potter, but they're a little earlier than that.
They are
The-
earlier. I was really young when those first started
Yeah,
coming
Deathly
out.
Hallows Part 1 was 2010, so it's like kind of right at the.
I think of Harry Potter as
Beginning of it.
more millennial, and then
Yeah.
like
Same.
Twilight, Hunger Games, Percy
But
But I
Jackson
think
is
it
Gen Z.
affected it.
But I definitely read them,
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
I think Harry Potter was the first of those book series I read, so I think it's a part of Gen Z for sure.
I would definitely say Twilight, Hunger Games, like 2 of the biggest things in our lives, probably. I also just need to mention this. I have the One Direction This Is Us
Yes,
documentary.
I noticed
The
that.
Justin Bieber documentary came out.
The Justin
like-
Bieber one, I went to theaters to watch that. I went
Yeah.
to theaters to watch the Hannah Montana one as
Yeah.
well.
And then I
that.
added Crazy Rich Asians because I think that
Does
was
that
like
count?
the last. It was 2018, so it's late in it. But I think this was like the last great book to movie romance
idea.
teenage
That's
girl
fair.
movie. It was crazy.
That
I
is-
also watched it this week, so I just really wanted to add it.
I love Crazy Rich Asians.
It's-
I think I was too old, not too old, I was literally 18, but it doesn't feel like middle school or like high school me.
Yeah,
It was
that's true.
separated.
But that is a huge movie for a lot of people, especially our age. Like everyone
They took me
knows
off
and loves
planes
that
lately.
movie.
They recently-
Really?
Yeah.
How dare they?
Wow.
It's
Go
no
watch
longer
our
on
niche
planes.
movies and niche episodes.
We talked about how Crazy Rich Asians is the
Presentations
plane
on a
movie.
plane.
And they actually
I don't think
just
that comes
took
out
it off
before
the plane. I
Oh,
saw
yeah.
a tweet about it the other day. They're like, I
Wow.
need to announce that Crazy Rich Asians is no longer on planes. So
Tragic.
That is tragic.
it could be a lie. Twitter lies all the time.
All right, so that's the 2010s. That's our teenage hood. It was amazing. We loved it. I loved it. I think it made us into who we are today.
Yeah.
Sure. But yeah, so excited to see what teenagers are into next. It's always interesting.
Actually scared to see what teenagers are into.
If you enjoyed this, if you were a teen in the 2010s, let us know your favorite. What impacted you the most? Follow us. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. We've got it all. Support us. It means the world to us. And definitely talk to us about this era of film because I love it and I will talk forever. All right. That's all we got. Enjoy the 2020s. Bye.
Bye.